The forest was like a living thing, ancient and unforgiving. Towering trees, their gnarled limbs twisting in eerie patterns, cast long shadows across the forest floor. The underbrush crackled underfoot with the weight of unseen creatures, their movements just beyond the edge of vision. Above, the sky was an oppressive slate gray, threatening a storm but withholding the rain. The air felt thick, stagnant, as though the entire place was holding its breath, waiting for something to break the silence. Caden Rees moved with quiet precision, his combat boots pressing softly into the damp earth. His sharp, weathered eyes scanned the surroundings, his pulse steady beneath the layers of armor he wore. Every breath he took was controlled, measured. He had learned long ago that in places like this, one wrong step could be fatal. The mission was simple enough: reconnaissance. In and out, no confrontation, no unnecessary risks. His orders were to investigate a strange signal detected deep within this godforsaken forest. It wasn't his first time in hostile territory, and Caden was no stranger to danger. He thrived on it, really. It was easier than facing the empty silence of civilian life, where memories of loss and guilt crept in. Here, in the field, there was only the mission. That's what kept him grounded. But tonight, something was different. He felt it in his bones, the way the forest seemed to move around him, almost alive, watching. The stillness was unnatural, a silence not born of peace but of something else, something lurking just beyond the trees. His hand instinctively tightened around the hilt of his combat knife, the cool metal reassuring against his gloved fingers. He could feel the weight of his sidearm at his hip, though he wasn't keen on using it unless absolutely necessary. He continued deeper, following the faint signal on his wrist device, its green light blinking rhythmically with each step. The trees seemed to press closer together, their bark rough and scarred from centuries of growth. Moss clung to their trunks like a second skin, and thick vines hung low, swaying gently despite the lack of wind. His every instinct screamed caution, but Caden pushed forward, driven by the nagging sense that something or someone was waiting for him ahead. Then, through the heavy mist that curled low to the ground, he saw it. A figure, lying still on the forest floor. At first he thought it was another fallen tree, a trick of the light, or perhaps an animal wounded by some unseen predator. But as he moved closer, the shape came into focus. It was unmistakably humanoid, a woman, motionless, her body draped in a strange, shimmering fabric that clung to her like liquid silver. Her skin, pale and almost translucent, seemed to glow faintly in the dim light filtering through the canopy above. Caden stopped in his tracks, his breath catching in his throat. His training told him to retreat, to assess the situation from a distance, but something pulled him closer. His eyes narrowed, scanning her form for any signs of life, of movement. The closer he got, the more unsettling the sight became. The woman, if she could be called, that was wounded. A shallow cut ran across her chest, a strange, faintly purple liquid oozing from the wound. Her breath was shallow, ragged, each exhale filled with pain. Her long, silvery hair, streaked with mud and leaves, fanned out around her head like a halo, but there was nothing angelic about her condition. She was dying. Caden knelt beside her, his fingers brushing the ground near her arm as he studied her. There was no mistaking the otherworldly nature of her appearance. Her skin, her clothes, the strange hue of her blood, it all screamed of something not of this world. But beneath the otherworldly beauty was fragility, a vulnerability that tugged at a part of him he thought had long been buried. He hesitated for a moment, torn between his mission and this strange being lying helpless before him. What was she? And why was she here, deep in this desolate forest? More importantly, how could he help her? His mind raced, calculating the possibilities, but there was no time to deliberate. Her breathing was getting fainter by the second. Instinct took over. Reaching into the pouch strapped to his belt, Caden fumbled for his medkit. His hands, steady in the face of danger, moved with purpose. He pulled out a small vial of antiseptic and a strip of bandage, his eyes darting between her wound and her pale, luminous face. Her eyelids fluttered weakly, but she did not stir. "Hold on," he muttered under his breath, though he wasn't sure if she could hear him. "I'll take care of you." Carefully, he reached out, intending to clean the wound and stop the bleeding. But the moment his fingers made contact with her arm, the world around him shifted. A shock wave of sensation blasted through him, not physical but something deeper, more profound. It was as if the very air around them pulsed with energy, vibrating with a rhythm neither of them could control. His heart hammered in his chest, his breath coming faster as the feeling intensified. It wasn't just the warmth of her skin, soft and smooth beneath his touch, it was something more, something primal. In that instant, it was as if a door had been flung open inside his mind, and through it, flashes of another world poured in. Visions chaotic, fragmented, rushed at him. He saw strange landscapes, cities made of crystal and light, bathed in the glow of twin suns. He saw her people, their faces filled with both sorrow and hope, struggling against an unseen enemy. He saw her younger, unburdened, her laughter carried by the wind of an alien world. And then came the fear, the darkness that crept over everything, the betrayal, the pain. His hand jerked back instinctively, breaking the connection, but it was too late. The images burned into his mind, leaving behind an imprint that felt too real to be a mere hallucination. Caden staggered back, his breath ragged, eyes wide with shock. What in the hell had just happened? Before he could process the visions, her eyes snapped open. They were unlike anything he had ever seen, silver and glowing, swirling with a light that seemed to pulse with life. She gasped, the sound sharp and pained, her chest rising and falling unevenly as she struggled to draw breath. Her gaze locked onto his, and for a brief moment, neither of them moved. The connection wasn't broken. He could feel it, still there, humming between them like an invisible thread, linking their minds, their emotions. She was afraid, confused, but there was something else too, recognition, as if she had known him long before this moment. She coughed weakly, her hand trembling as it reached out toward him. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Only the silence of the forest answered her. Caden swallowed hard, his throat tight. "I'm here to help," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the tumult inside him. He reached for her again, more cautiously this time, half expecting another shockwave to tear through him. But the contact was different now, softer, gentler, though the connection still pulsed between them. He worked quickly, applying the antiseptic to the wound, watching as the strange purple blood hissed against the medication. Her body tensed under his touch, but she didn't pull away. Slowly he wrapped the bandage around her chest, his fingers moving deftly, though his mind was still reeling from the psychic onslaught. As he worked, more images flitted through his mind, brief flashes of her pain, her isolation, the horrors she had faced. And in return, she seemed to see him too. Caden could feel it the way she glimpsed his own scars, not just the physical ones but the emotional wounds he kept hidden beneath layers of duty and discipline. She saw his loneliness, his grief for the comrades he had lost, and the weight of the mission that had brought him here. It was more than just a bond of touch, it was something far deeper, an exchange of souls, a merging of experiences that neither of them could fully comprehend. When he finished dressing her wound, Caden sat back on his heels, his chest heaving with the effort of trying to steady himself. She was still staring at him, her eyes wide and unblinking, but there was something different now. The fear that had clouded her expression was softening, replaced by a tentative trust. And then, without warning, she reached out, her hand trembling as she grasped his. The moment her fingers curled around his, another wave of energy passed between them, but this time it was gentler, more controlled. Caden's pulse quickened as he felt her emotions, gratitude, trust, and something deeper, something unspoken. His own emotions mirrored hers, though he couldn't explain why. This was no ordinary encounter, he knew that much. Whatever this strange woman, this alien was, whatever she had endured, they were connected now, bound by something far beyond understanding. And that bond was growing stronger with each passing second. In the stillness of the forest, as night fully descended and the air grew colder, Caden realized that this simple act of compassion, this touch, had changed everything. They were no longer strangers. And whatever happened next, he knew that their fates were now inextricably tied together. The silence of the forest weighed heavily as night descended fully, the dense canopy blotting out the stars above. Caden Reese sat beside the alien woman, his mind still reeling from the intensity of the connection that had formed between them. The forest around them, once merely an ominous backdrop to his mission, now felt alive in a way it hadn't before. Every shadow seemed to pulse with possibility. Every whisper of the wind carried a weight that unsettled him. Alara, as he now knew her name, lay beside him, her breathing still shallow but more even than before. He could feel her presence in a way that was hard to describe. It wasn't just that she was physically near him, it was as though part of her mind had become embedded in his, like a soft echo, just behind his thoughts. Her emotions flickered at the edge of his consciousness, exhaustion, pain, fear, but beneath that, there was something deeper, a strength born of years of survival. He glanced down at her. Her silver eyes, now dimmer in the growing darkness, were half closed, her expression tight with discomfort. The bandage he had wrapped around her chest had slowed the flow of her strange purple blood, but her injuries were serious. And then there was the wound. They couldn't bandage the wound inside, the one that had come from whatever catastrophe had shattered her life before she'd ended up in this forest. She stirred slightly, her fingers twitching against the moss-covered ground. Caden felt a sudden spike of pain in his chest, not his own, but hers, a flash of sensation that lanced through their shared connection. It took him a moment to steady himself, to push the foreign emotion aside. This bond, whatever it was going to take some getting used to. "I need to move you," Caden murmured softly, more to himself than to her. He wasn't sure she could even understand him, but the thought of leaving her here, exposed in the open with the forest's predators lurking in the darkness, was unacceptable. He had to get her somewhere safer, somewhere they could rest without the constant threat of attack hanging over them. He scanned their surroundings, his soldier's instincts kicking in. The trees here were ancient, their trunks massive and gnarled, offering some protection from the wind, but they weren't enough. The ground sloped upward a few hundred meters ahead, and there, nestled among the rocks, was what appeared to be a cave, small, perhaps, but sufficient for their purposes. It would give them shelter, and with any luck, it would buy them some time. Caden knelt beside Alara and gently slipped his arms under her frail body, lifting her with as much care as he could manage. Her form was light, almost unnaturally so, as if she were made of something more ephemeral than flesh and bone. Her eyes fluttered open as he moved her, and for a brief moment their gazes locked. That same strange pulse of energy passed between them, though this time it felt softer, less like a jolt and more like a ripple of awareness. "Easy," he whispered, adjusting her in his arms as he started toward the cave. "We're going to get out of here." He didn't know if she understood him, but her head rested against his chest, and her breathing, though strained, remained steady. Each step felt slow, deliberate, as though the forest itself were watching, judging their movements. The path to the cave was uneven, the ground littered with roots and stones, but Caden's training took over, his body moving with the practiced ease of someone who had navigated hostile terrain more times than he cared to remember. As he neared the entrance of the cave, a strange sensation washed over him, a warning, almost. He paused, instinctively tightening his grip on Alara, scanning the shadows for any sign of danger. The air felt different here, thicker, as if the cave itself was holding its breath. Caden hesitated only a moment longer before stepping inside, the weight of the forest lifting slightly as the stone walls closed in around them. The cave was shallow but dry, the floor smooth and cool underfoot. It wasn't much, but it would do for the night. He gently lowered Alara onto the ground, using his pack as a makeshift pillow for her head. She stirred again, her eyes flickering open and closed as she drifted in and out of consciousness. Her hand reached out weakly, and without thinking, Caden took it, the warmth of her touch sending another ripple of energy through him. "You'll be safe here," he said quietly, though again he wasn't sure if she could understand him. "I'll stay with you." He sat down beside her, leaning against the cave wall, his eyes never leaving her. The bond between them hummed faintly, a constant presence now, like a low vibration in the back of his mind. He could sense her thoughts, fractured as they were fragments of memory, pieces of her world that slipped through the connection they shared. And then, without warning, the visions came again. Caden's eyes widened as the world around him seemed to dissolve, the cave walls fading into mist. He wasn't in the forest anymore. He was somewhere else, somewhere vast and strange, the landscape bathed in a soft, ethereal light. The ground beneath his feet was smooth, crystalline, reflecting the glow of the twin suns that hung low in the sky. Towers of shimmering glass and light stretched upward, touching the clouds, their architecture delicate yet impossibly strong. This was her world. He could feel it in his bones, the connection between them strengthening as the vision unfolded. He saw Alara, standing among her people, tall, elegant figures with silver skin and glowing eyes, their movements graceful and fluid. They were a race of knowledge, of harmony, their society built on the exchange of ideas and the preservation of wisdom. Caden felt a pang of longing, a yearning for something he could barely understand, but knew instinctively. But the vision shifted. Darkness crept in, consuming the light. He saw flames, destruction, and the once glorious city reduced to ruin. He saw Alara standing alone amid the wreckage, her face etched with sorrow and despair. The skies above were dark, filled with ominous shapes ships, massive and predatory, descending upon the remnants of her world like vultures. And then came the invaders, their faces twisted with cruelty, their weapons designed not just for war but for annihilation. The Varanites. The name echoed in his mind, sharp and cold, a shiver running down his spine. He could feel Alara's fear, her desperation as she fled, her heart breaking as she left everything she had ever known behind. She had been the last of her kind to escape, her mission not one of survival but of preservation. She carried something within her, something precious knowledge perhaps, or a power that the Varanites sought to claim. The vision faded as quickly as it had come, leaving Caden breathless and disoriented. His heart hammered in his chest, and for a moment he wasn't sure if he was still in the cave or lost somewhere in the ruins of her world. He blinked, his eyes adjusting to the dim light of the cave once more, his mind reeling from what he had just seen. Alara's hand tightened slightly around his, her fingers trembling. Her eyes fluttered open, and this time when she looked at him, there was a clarity in her gaze that hadn't been there before. She was weak, yes, but there was determination too, a silent plea in the way she held his hand, as if she was asking for more than just help, she was asking for understanding. Caden leaned closer, his voice soft but urgent. "I saw them," he whispered. "The Varanites. They destroyed your world." Alara's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but she nodded, the faintest of movements. Her lips parted, and this time she managed to speak, though her voice was barely more than a whisper. "They will. Come," she said, her words strained, each breath an effort. "For me, for this world." Caden's jaw tightened. He didn't know much about the Varanites, but from what he had seen in her vision, they were more than just conquerors, they were destroyers, relentless in their pursuit of power. And if they were coming for her, then it meant they were coming for this planet too. Whatever Alara carried within her, whatever knowledge or power she possessed, it was important enough to incite the wrath of a species hell-bent on domination. He looked down at her, his mind racing. What do they want? What are they after? Alara closed her eyes for a moment, her face pale, as though the effort of speaking was too much. When she opened them again, her gaze was distant, as though she were looking beyond him, seeing something he couldn't. "Energy," she whispered. "My people, we were connected. To the stars, to the universe we held. The power of life, of creation. The Varanites, they want it, they take, they destroy." Her words trailed off, and she winced, the pain evident in the way her body tensed. Caden's grip on her hand tightened, the weight of her revelation sinking in. The Varanites weren't just after conquest, they were after something far more valuable. The power to create, the power of life itself. And Alara, as the last of her kind, was the key to unlocking that power. He stared at her, his mind a storm of thoughts. This mission had been simple: once investigate a signal, gather intel, report back. But now, everything had changed. He was no longer just a soldier following orders. He was caught in something far bigger than himself, a conflict that stretched across worlds, and Alara was at the center of it. His pulse quickened as he realized what this meant. The Varanites were coming, and they wouldn't stop until they found her. "We need to get out of here," Caden said, his voice firm. "I need to get you to safety. Somewhere they can't find you." Alara's eyes met his, and for a moment there was a flicker of fear, but also understanding. She knew what was coming. She had been running from it for so long, but now she wasn't alone. Slowly, painfully, she nodded. And with that single movement, their path was set. The forest outside the cave seemed to whisper in the dark, the winds picking up, carrying with them the scent of danger. Caden felt it in his bones the storm was coming. And they would face it together. V. The first light of dawn broke over the horizon, casting long, golden fingers through the dense canopy of the forest. The mist that had settled during the night still lingered in the lowlands, swirling like ghostly tendrils around the bases of the massive trees. The forest, which had been a silent, foreboding place the night before, now seemed strangely alive. Birds began to stir, their songs echoing softly in the cool morning air, and the sound of distant water, perhaps a stream, could just be heard beneath the rustle of leaves. But for Caden Rees, none of the forest's beauty registered. His mind was elsewhere, focused on the woman lying beside him, and the heavy weight of the secrets she carried. The events of the previous night still buzzed in his thoughts, refusing to settle into a coherent narrative. He had seen her world Alara's world and felt the devastation, the weight of her loss, as though it had been his own. The visions had been so vivid, so consuming, that even now, hours later, they haunted him like a fever dream. Alara stirred slightly, her breathing shallow but steadier than it had been the night before. She looked fragile still, her silver hair spread out beneath her, catching the first light in a way that made it shimmer like strands of moonlight. The bandage around her chest was stained with the faintest traces of her purple blood, but the wound had stopped seeping, and her pallor, while still ghostly, was no longer as deathly white. Caden sat with his back to the cave wall, one knee drawn up, his hand resting absently on the hilt of his knife. He had not slept. His instincts, honed by years of combat, wouldn't allow it. Instead, he had spent the night on high alert, listening to the sounds of the forest, waiting for anything that would signal danger. But the night had passed uneventfully, leaving him with nothing but his own thoughts and the growing bond between him and Alara. And that bond, whatever it was, felt stronger than ever. Even now, as she slept, he could feel her presence in his mind, faint, but unmistakable. Her thoughts, her emotions flitted at the edge of his consciousness like shadows. There was a connection between them, something beyond mere touch, something that tied their fates together in a way he couldn't yet understand. It unsettled him, but it also compelled him to protect her, to keep her safe, even as he grappled with the enormity of the situation. She wasn't just a refugee from another world, she was something far more dangerous. She carried within her the remnants of her people's power, a power that the Viranites would stop at nothing to claim. And that made her a target, one that could not remain hidden for long. Caden's jaw tightened as he thought of the Viranites. The vision of their invasion, the ships, the fire, the death was still fresh in his mind. He had seen war before, but nothing like that. The Viranites were more than conquerors, they were destroyers, and they would burn through anything that stood in their way. If they were coming for Alara, he needed to be ready. The thought spurred him to action. He needed information, and he needed to find a way to stop the Viranites. There had to be something more to Alara's power, something they could use to fight back. And if there was any hope of understanding it, it would lie in the ruins she had mentioned the night before, the remnants of an ancient Orient outpost hidden somewhere in this forest. He glanced down at Alara again. She was still unconscious, her breathing slow but even. Caden knew they couldn't stay here much longer. The Viranites were undoubtedly tracking her, and it was only a matter of time before they found her trail. He had to move her to safety, but he also needed answers. Alara, he said softly, his voice low and careful, not wanting to startle her. We need to move. Her eyelids fluttered slightly at the sound of his voice, but she did not stir. Caden frowned, leaning closer. He reached out, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. The moment his fingers touched her skin, the bond between them flared to life again, stronger this time. He felt a rush of her emotions, pain, fear, exhaustion, and then, deeper still, a powerful resolve. Her eyes opened, the silver depths reflecting the soft light of the morning. For a moment she seemed disoriented, her gaze flickering between Caden and the cave around them. Then, recognition settled in, and she exhaled softly, her expression weary but determined. Caden, she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. We have to go. I know, he replied, helping her to sit up. Can you walk? Alara winced as she shifted, her hand going to the bandage at her chest. But she nodded, her face set in a grim mask of determination. I'll manage. Caden wasn't convinced, but he didn't argue. Time was against them, and they needed to reach the Orient outpost before the Viranites closed in. He stood and offered her his hand. She took it, and once again, that strange, electric pulse passed between them. The bond, the connection, was there, unmistakable, powerful. He could feel her strength, her will, and something else, something ancient, buried deep within her. It was a power unlike anything he had ever encountered before, and it stirred at the edge of his awareness, like a sleeping giant waiting to be awakened. They left the cave together, moving cautiously through the forest. Alara leaned on him for support, her steps slow but steady. The forest was alive with the sounds of morning birds chirping, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, but beneath it all, there was a tension, an undercurrent of danger that Caden could not shake. They moved in silence for a time, the weight of the previous night's revelations hanging between them. Caden's thoughts raced as they navigated the uneven terrain. He needed to understand what Alara's power was, and more importantly, how they could use it to their advantage. But every time he tried to focus on the bond between them, it slipped through his mental fingers like water. Whatever this connection was, it was deeper, more complex than anything he could fully grasp. "Alara," he said finally, breaking the silence. "The outpost you mentioned last night, it's nearby, isn't it?" She nodded, her face pale and drawn with pain, but her eyes were sharp, focused. "Yes, it's hidden. Only those with Orion blood can find it, but I can lead us there." Caden frowned, the weight of her words sinking in. "What exactly is there? You said something about your people's power. Is it a weapon?" Alara shook her head slowly. "No, not a weapon. It's more than that. The Orions didn't believe in war. We believed in creation, in connection. The power we held was the energy of life itself. It could heal, it could build, but it could also destroy if used improperly." Her words hung in the air, thick with implication. Caden's mind churned as he processed what she was saying. If the Varenites got their hands on that kind of power, they wouldn't just destroy planets, they would destroy entire systems, perhaps even galaxies. "And you," Caden asked carefully, "you have this power?" Alara hesitated, her gaze dropping to the ground. "I carry the remnants of it, my people. We were connected to the stars, to the energy of the universe itself. When the Varenites attacked, they severed that connection. But I survived. I carry what's left of that power within me. It's dormant, but it can be awakened." Caden's stomach tightened. The implications were staggering. She wasn't just a survivor, she was a living key, a conduit to a power that could reshape reality itself. And if the Varenites got to her— "We need to get there," Caden said firmly, his hand tightening around hers, "before they find us." Alara nodded, her face set in grim determination. "It's not far." They continued through the forest, the terrain becoming rockier and more treacherous as they climbed higher. The trees grew denser, their trunks wider, gnarled with age. The air grew cooler, the sounds of the forest fading into a distant hum. Caden kept a wary eye on their surroundings, his instincts sharp, but there was no sign of pursuit, at least, not yet. After what felt like hours, they reached the top of a steep incline, and Alara paused, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She gestured toward a thick wall of vines that hung like a curtain over the rock face in front of them. "Behind here," she whispered. Caden stepped forward, pushing aside the vines to reveal a hidden crevice in the rock. The entrance was narrow, just wide enough for them to squeeze through. He cast a glance at Alara, who nodded, her face pale but resolute. They entered the crevice, the walls pressing in on either side, and after a few meters it opened into a vast chamber. Caden's breath caught in his throat at the sight before him. The outpost was ancient, its walls carved from the living rock, but it was unlike anything he had ever seen. Strange, luminescent crystals jutted out from the stone, their soft glow casting eerie shadows across the room. The architecture was elegant, ethereal, with delicate arches and intricate patterns carved into the walls. It felt alive, as though the very structure of the place pulsed with the same energy he had felt in Alara's touch. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, and atop it, a stone unlike any he had ever seen. It was large, about the size of his fist, and it seemed to hum with power. Its surface was smooth, almost liquid, and it radiated a soft, golden light that pulsed gently, like the beat of a heart. Alara stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the stone. "The synergy stone," she whispered, her voice filled with awe and something close to fear. "It's the key." Caden frowned, stepping closer to the pedestal. "The key to what?" "To everything," Alara said, her voice trembling slightly. "This stone amplifies the connection between two beings. It can awaken the power within me, but only if the bond between us is strong enough." Caden's heart pounded in his chest as the enormity of what she was saying sank in. The bond between them, the strange connection that had formed the moment they touched this stone, could magnify it, could unlock the dormant power within Alara and make it strong enough to defeat the Varenites. But the cost. He swallowed hard. What happens if we use it? Alara turned to him, her eyes shimmering with both fear and hope. "It will merge us, our minds, our souls. If we aren't strong enough, it could destroy us both." Caden's pulse quickened as he stared at the stone. This was their only chance, their only hope of stopping the Varenites. But it was a risk unlike any he had ever faced. He would be bound to her in ways that went beyond comprehension, beyond the physical or emotional. Their lives would be intertwined forever. But there was no other choice. The Varanites were coming, and if they found the stone, if they found Alara, they would unleash a darkness that could consume everything. He looked at her, meeting her gaze. "I trust you." Alara's eyes softened, and she stepped closer, reaching out to touch the stone. The moment her fingers brushed the surface, a pulse of energy surged through the room, vibrating in the air, like the strumming of a distant chord. Caden reached out, his hand closing over hers. Their connection flared to life stronger than ever, and the world around them seemed to dissolve into a whirl of light and sound. The synergy stone glowed brighter, its energy enveloping them both, and for a moment, Caden's mind was flooded with visions of stars, of worlds beyond count, of the very fabric of the universe itself. And then, with a final, blinding flash, everything went dark. Alara hesitated, her gaze dropping to the ground. "I carry the remnants of it, my people. We were connected to the stars, to the energy of the universe itself. When the Varanites attacked, they severed that connection. But I survived. I carry what's left of that power within me. It's dormant, but it can be awakened." Caden's stomach tightened. The implications were staggering. She wasn't just a survivor, she was a living key, a conduit to a power that could reshape reality itself. And if the Varanites got to her... "We need to get there," Caden said firmly, his hand tightening around hers, "before they find us." Alara nodded, her face set in grim determination. "It's not far." They continued through the forest, the terrain becoming rockier and more treacherous as they climbed higher. The trees grew denser, their trunks wider, gnarled with age. The air grew cooler, the sounds of the forest fading into a distant hum. Caden kept a wary eye on their surroundings, his instincts sharp, but there was no sign of pursuit, at least, not yet. After what felt like hours, they reached the top of a steep incline, and Alara paused, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She gestured toward a thick wall of vines that hung like a curtain over the rock face in front of them. "Behind here," she whispered. Caden stepped forward, pushing aside the vines to reveal a hidden crevice in the rock. The entrance was narrow, just wide enough for them to squeeze through. He cast a glance at Alara, who nodded, her face pale but resolute. They entered the crevice, the walls pressing in on either side, and after a few meters it opened into a vast chamber. Caden's breath caught in his throat at the sight before him. The outpost was ancient, its walls carved from the living rock, but it was unlike anything he had ever seen. Strange, luminescent crystals jutted out from the stone, their soft glow casting eerie shadows across the room. The architecture was elegant, ethereal, with delicate arches and intricate patterns carved into the walls. It felt alive, as though the very structure of the place pulsed with the same energy he had felt in Alara's touch. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, and atop it, a stone unlike any he had ever seen. It was large, about the size of his fist, and it seemed to hum with power. Its surface was smooth, almost liquid, and it radiated a soft, golden light that pulsed gently, like the beat of a heart. Alara stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the stone. "The synergy stone," she whispered, her voice filled with awe and something close to fear. "It's the key." Caden frowned, stepping closer to the pedestal. "The key to what?" "To everything," Alara said, her voice trembling slightly. "This stone amplifies the connection between two beings. It can awaken the power within me, but only if the bond between us is strong enough." Caden's heart pounded in his chest as the enormity of what she was saying sank in. The bond between them, the strange connection that had formed the moment they touched this stone, could magnify it, could unlock the dormant power within Alara and make it strong enough to defeat the Varanites. But the cost. He swallowed hard. "What happens if we use it?" Alara turned to him, her eyes shimmering with both fear and hope. "It will merge us, our minds, our souls. If we aren't strong enough, it could destroy us both." Caden's pulse quickened as he stared at the stone. This was their only chance, their only hope of stopping the Varanites. But it was a risk unlike any he had ever faced. He would be bound to her in ways that went beyond comprehension, beyond the physical or emotional. Their lives would be intertwined forever. But there was no other choice. The Varanites were coming, and if they found the stone, if they found Alara, they would unleash a darkness that could consume everything. He looked at her, meeting her gaze. "I trust you." Alara's eyes softened, and she stepped closer, reaching out to touch the stone. The moment her fingers brushed the surface, a pulse of energy surged through the room, vibrating in the air, like the strumming of a distant chord. Caden reached out, his hand closing over hers. Their connection flared to life stronger than ever, and the world around them seemed to dissolve into a whirl of light and sound. The synergy stone glowed brighter, its energy enveloping them both, and for a moment, Caden's mind was flooded with visions of stars, of worlds beyond count, of the very fabric of the universe itself. And then, with a final, blinding flash, everything went dark. Caden's world was consumed by darkness. For a brief moment he floated in a void, weightless and disoriented, with nothing but the echo of Alara's presence flickering at the edge of his consciousness. The surge of energy from the synergy stone still hummed through him, vibrating in his bones, but the blinding light that had enveloped them had receded, leaving a silence so profound it seemed to stretch into eternity. Then, slowly, like the first brush of dawn, sensation returned. The stone beneath his fingers felt cool, and a faint warmth blossomed in his chest, a warmth that wasn't his own. It was her. Alara's presence flowed into him like a gentle current, her thoughts intertwining with his in a way that felt both intimate and alien. He could feel her, truly feel her, not just her emotions but the very essence of who she was, as though their minds had fused at the edges, blending into something greater than the sum of their individual selves. His eyes blinked open to find the chamber around them unchanged, the soft glow of the crystals still illuminating the ancient Orient outpost. But something was different. He could sense it in the air, in the way the stone walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The synergy stone still rested on the pedestal between them, but it no longer glowed with the intense energy that had enveloped them moments before. Instead, its light had dimmed to a soft, steady pulse, almost as if it were breathing. And then there was Alara. She stood before him, her silver hair flowing gently over her shoulders, her pale skin glowing faintly in the crystal light. Her eyes, once dull with pain and exhaustion, now shone with a vibrant energy that seemed to radiate from within. She was still weak, her body recovering from the strain of her injuries, but there was a newfound strength in her stance, a subtle power that rippled through the air around her. Caden felt it too, a strange, buzzing sensation at the back of his mind, as if a door had opened inside him, allowing him access to something vast and incomprehensible. His senses were sharper, more attuned to the world around him. He could feel the energy of the outpost, the hum of the crystals, and the pulse of life that flowed through the forest outside. But most of all, he could feel Alara. Her presence in his mind was like a steady flame, burning bright and strong, and he knew, without a doubt, that their bond had deepened in ways he had never imagined. "We did it," Alara whispered, her voice soft but filled with awe. "The stone. It worked." Caden nodded, still trying to wrap his mind around the enormity of what had just happened. He could feel her emotions as clearly as his own, her relief, her gratitude, and the lingering fear that still clung to the edges of her thoughts. But beneath that, there was something else, something more profound: hope. For the first time since they had met, Caden realized that Alara believed they might actually have a chance. The power of the synergy stone had awakened something within her, something that had been dormant for too long. But it wasn't just her power, it was their power, bound together by the connection they now shared. He opened his mouth to speak, to ask her what came next, but before he could form the words, a sudden tremor shook the ground beneath their feet. Alara's eyes widened in alarm, and Caden's hand flew instinctively to his sidearm. The tremor was faint at first, a distant rumble that seemed to vibrate through the stone walls of the outpost. But it grew stronger, the ground shuddering beneath them as the air filled with the sound of cracking stone. "They're here," Alara whispered, her voice tight with fear. Caden's heart lurched in his chest. The Varenites, the enemy they had both been running from, the ones who had destroyed Alara's world and were now hunting her across the stars. He had known they would come eventually, but now, faced with the reality of their arrival, a cold dread settled in his gut. "We need to move," he said, his voice low but urgent. "Now." Alara nodded, and together they turned and made their way toward the narrow crevice that had led them into the outpost. The tremors continued, growing stronger with each passing second, until the walls around them began to groan under the pressure. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and the crystals embedded in the stone flickered like dying embers. As they reached the entrance, Caden stopped, turning back for one last look at the synergy stone. It still rested on the pedestal, its soft glow pulsing gently in the dim light. A part of him wanted to take it, to carry it with them as a weapon against the Varanites, but he knew instinctively that it was too dangerous. The stone's power had been awakened, but it wasn't meant to be wielded recklessly. It was a tool of creation, not destruction. "Alara," he called, his voice echoing in the narrow space. "We have to leave it." She turned back to him, her eyes filled with understanding. "It will protect itself," she said quietly. "The power it holds. It's too great for the Varanites to touch." Caden nodded, trusting her judgment. With one last glance at the stone, he followed Alara out of the chamber and into the open air. The forest was alive with chaos. The sky, once clear and blue, was now dark with the shadow of Varanite ships, their sleek, angular forms cutting through the clouds like blades. The sound of engines roared overhead, shaking the ground as the massive vessels descended toward the forest, their searchlights piercing the dense canopy like spears of light. The air was thick with tension, and the distant hum of Varanite drones filled the air as they scoured the forest for any sign of their quarry. Caden's heart raced as he took in the sight. The Varanites had found them, and they had brought the full force of their fleet with them. There was no time to waste. "We have to get to higher ground," Alara said, her voice barely audible over the roar of the ships. "There's a plateau just beyond the ridge. It will give us a better vantage point." Caden nodded, his mind already calculating the best route. The forest was thick here, the trees growing close together, but if they moved quickly, they could use the cover to their advantage. He could feel the bond between them pulsing with urgency, their shared connection heightening his awareness of her movements, her thoughts. It was as though they were moving in sync, their actions perfectly coordinated without the need for words. They sprinted through the forest, dodging low-hanging branches and leaping over roots as the Varanite ships descended behind them. The ground trembled with each pass of the massive vessels, and the air buzzed with the sound of the drones as they combed the area. Caden's every sense was on high alert, his eyes scanning the trees for any sign of danger. Ahead of him, Alara moved with a grace that belied her injuries, her feet barely touching the ground as she led them through the forest. Her silver hair streamed behind her like a banner, and the glow that had once been faint now pulsed with renewed strength. She was different now, stronger, more confident, and Caden could feel the power within her, humming just beneath the surface, waiting to be unleashed. The plateau Alara had mentioned loomed ahead, a sheer rock face that jutted up from the forest floor like a sentinel. Caden's breath came in ragged gasps as they reached the base of the ridge, his muscles burning from the exertion. They had made it this far, but the real challenge lay ahead. The ridge was steep, the rock face uneven, but it was their best chance of getting a clear view of the Varanite forces and perhaps finding a way to fight back. "Go," Caden urged, nodding toward the ridge. "I'll cover you." Alara hesitated for a moment, her eyes locking with his. He could feel her uncertainty, the fear that still lingered at the edges of her thoughts, but he also felt her resolve. She trusted him, and he trusted her. Without another word, she began to climb, her fingers finding purchase in the rough stone as she pulled herself upward. Caden stayed close behind, his eyes scanning the forest for any sign of movement. The drones were still sweeping the area, their searchlights cutting through the trees like knives, but they hadn't spotted them yet. As they reached the top of the ridge, Caden pulled himself up onto the plateau and turned to scan the horizon. What he saw made his blood run cold. The Varanite fleet was massive. Dozens of ships hung in the air like dark clouds, their engines thrumming with a low, menacing hum. Below, on the forest floor, Varanite soldiers moved in tight formations, their armor glinting in the dim light as they fanned out in search of their target. Drones buzzed overhead, their searchlights sweeping the ground in precise patterns, while larger, more heavily armed vehicles rumbled through the underbrush, tearing down trees and flattening everything in their path. "They're not wasting any time," Caden muttered, his jaw clenched. Alara stood beside him, her eyes wide as she took in the sight. "They know I'm here," she whispered. "They can feel the power, the energy. They're drawn to it." Caden nodded grimly. "Then we'll have to draw them away." Alara turned to him, her eyes filled with determination. "There's something I need to tell you," she said quietly, her voice steady, despite the fear he could feel bubbling beneath the surface. "The bond between us, it's stronger than I thought. The synergy stone amplified it in ways I didn't expect. I can feel your thoughts, your emotions, and you can feel mine." Caden nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. He had felt it too, the connection between them, the way their minds seemed to blend together, allowing them to understand each other without words. But there was something more, something deeper that he hadn't fully grasped yet. "We can use it," Alara continued, her voice urgent. "The power of the Synergy Stone isn't just in me, it's in us. Together, we can fight them. But it will take everything we have. The bond, it will consume us if we're not careful." Caden's pulse quickened as the weight of her words sank in. The bond they shared wasn't just a link, it was a weapon that could turn the tide of this battle, but only if they were willing to risk everything. "I'm with you," he said, his voice firm, "whatever it takes." Ilara's eyes softened, and for a moment, the fear and uncertainty melted away, replaced by something stronger: trust, and maybe even hope. They turned their attention back to the Varanite forces below, the weight of the moment settling over them like a shroud. The Varanites were closing in, their soldiers moving methodically through the forest, their weapons trained on the trees. They were searching for her, for the power she carried, and they wouldn't stop until they had it. "We need to make a stand," Caden said, his voice low. "If we can draw them to us, we might be able to use the Synergy Stone's power to stop them. But we have to act fast." Alara nodded, her face set in grim determination. "I'm ready." Caden could feel the energy building within her, a soft hum that resonated in the air around them. The bond between them pulsed with intensity, and for a moment he felt as though their hearts were beating in sync, their thoughts merging into one. The power was there, just beneath the surface, waiting to be unleashed. "Let's do this," Caden said, his hand tightening around his weapon. Together, they stood at the edge of the plateau, their eyes fixed on the advancing Varanite forces below. The air crackled with tension, the distant rumble of engines growing louder as the Varanite soldiers closed in. And then, with a final, determined breath, they unleashed the power of the Synergy Stone. The world exploded into light. A surge of energy erupted from the plateau, a brilliant pulse of golden light that shot into the sky like a beacon. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the air hummed with a strange, otherworldly vibration as the power of the Synergy Stone coursed through them, amplifying their bond, their connection, until it was almost overwhelming. The Varanite soldiers froze in their tracks, their weapons raised as they stared in shock at the blinding light. For a moment the forest fell silent, the only sound the distant roar of the Varanite ships. And then, with a sound like thunder, the battle began. The moment the golden light exploded from the plateau, Caden knew there was no turning back. The pulse of energy rippled through the air like a shockwave, crackling with raw power. The forest below them trembled in its wake, the leaves rustling in response to the force that had been unleashed. For a brief, breathtaking moment, time seemed to stand still, as if the very universe was holding its breath. Then the world erupted into chaos. The Varanites reacted instantly. The soldiers, their dark armor gleaming under the twin suns, shouted commands in a guttural language that Caden couldn't understand. They began to move, their formations shifting as they converged toward the plateau with lethal precision. The drones hovering in the sky adjusted their flight paths, their searchlights now trained on the source of the light, the place where Caden and Alara stood, glowing with the power of the Synergy Stone. Caden's heart pounded in his chest, his pulse racing as he felt the immense energy coursing through him. The bond between him and Alara pulsed with a life of its own, their thoughts merging, their emotions blending into a single, overwhelming force. He could feel her fear, her determination, her power, and he knew she could feel his as well. It was intoxicating, terrifying, and exhilarating all at once. "We need to control it," Alara whispered, her voice tight with strain as she struggled to harness the power surging between them. "The bond. It's too strong. If we don't focus, it will consume us." Caden nodded, gritting his teeth as he fought to steady himself. The energy was wild, unpredictable, like a storm raging inside his body. But he had faced storms before, both literal and figurative, and he wasn't about to let this one sweep him away. He tightened his grip on his weapon, grounding himself in the familiar weight of it, and focused on the bond, on Alara. Together, they could do this. The Varanite soldiers moved with chilling efficiency, spreading out in a wide arc as they advanced up the slope. Their rifles gleamed in the light of the Synergy Stone, their barrels trained on the plateau where Caden and Alara stood. The drones buzzed overhead, their searchlights flickering as they locked onto their targets. Caden's mind raced, analyzing the situation with the cold, tactical precision that had kept him alive in countless battles. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded on all sides, but they had the synergy stone and the bond. The question was whether it would be enough. "Ilara," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling around them, "we need to focus the energy. Can you direct it?" Ilara's silver eyes were wide, her face pale with concentration. She nodded, her expression determined. "Yes, but I need your help. The bond. It amplifies our power, but we have to be in sync. If we're not." She didn't finish the sentence, but Caden didn't need her to. He understood the stakes. If they lost control of the power, it wouldn't just destroy the Varanites, it could destroy them. He took a deep breath, feeling the energy hum through his veins, and nodded. "I'm with you." The bond flared, and for a moment, everything else faded away. It was just him and Ilara, their minds intertwined, their souls connected by the synergy stone. He could feel her emotions as clearly as his own, her fear, her hope, her trust. And in return, he gave her his strength, his focus, his unwavering determination to see this through. Together, they turned their attention to the Varanite soldiers below. The first wave of soldiers opened fire, their rifles spitting streams of plasma that lit up the air with deadly, searing light. Caden's instincts kicked in, and he raised his arm, feeling the bond respond as Ilara's power surged through him. A shimmering barrier of golden energy formed in front of them, absorbing the plasma blasts and deflecting them harmlessly into the air. Caden's eyes widened in shock as he realized what they had just done. The barrier, it wasn't just Ilara's power, it was theirs. The bond between them had created it, forged from the energy of the synergy stone and their connection. He could feel the power thrumming through him, responding to his thoughts, his movements. It was as though he and Ilara were two parts of a whole, working in perfect harmony. "Ilara," he called, his voice filled with awe. "We can fight back." She didn't need to be told twice. With a fierce, determined look, she raised her hand, and the golden barrier shimmered and expanded, pushing outward with a wave of energy. The Varanite soldiers staggered back as the wave hit them, their rifles raised in futile defense. Several of them were thrown off their feet, crashing into the trees with bone-crunching force. Caden grinned despite himself. The power was incredible, unlike anything he had ever experienced. But there was no time to revel in it. More soldiers were advancing, their numbers seemingly endless, and the drones above were preparing to launch an aerial strike. "We need to take out the drones," Caden said, his voice sharp as he calculated their next move. "If they get a lock on us, we're finished." Ilara nodded, her expression grim. She raised both hands, her silver eyes glowing with the light of the synergy stone. The air around them crackled with energy as she focused, her brow furrowing with concentration. Caden could feel the power building, the bond between them tightening as they prepared to unleash their next strike. The drones whirred overhead, their sleek, angular forms cutting through the sky like birds of prey. Their targeting systems locked onto the plateau, the whine of their engines growing louder as they prepared to fire. But before they could, a burst of golden light shot from Ilara's outstretched hands, arcing into the sky like a lightning bolt. The energy crackled through the air, striking the drones with precision. One by one, they exploded in bursts of flame and metal, their wreckage raining down on the Varanite soldiers below. Caden let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but the battle was far from over. The Varanite soldiers were regrouping, their commanders barking orders as they adjusted their tactics. And then, through the haze of smoke and fire, Caden saw them. The Varanite elite. They were taller than the other soldiers, their armor darker, more menacing. Their helmets were adorned with intricate designs that glinted in the light of the synergy stone, and their weapons were larger, more advanced. These were the Varanite's finest warriors, trained killers who had conquered entire worlds. Caden's grip tightened on his weapon. This was it, the final test. "They're sending their best," he muttered, his jaw clenched. "We need to end this." Ilara's face was pale, but her eyes burned with determination. "The bond," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "We have to use it fully. It's the only way to defeat them." Caden hesitated for a moment, his mind racing. The bond between them was powerful, but it was also dangerous. If they pushed it too far, if they lost control. But there was no other choice. The Varanites wouldn't stop until they had Alara, until they had the power of the Synergy Stone. If they didn't act now, they would be overrun. "I trust you," he said quietly, meeting her gaze. "Let's finish this." Alara nodded, her expression fierce. She took his hand, and the bond between them flared to life once more, stronger than ever. Caden felt the surge of energy, the power of the Synergy Stone pulsing through their connection. It was overwhelming, like standing at the edge of a storm, but he didn't pull away. He embraced it, let it flow through him, trusting in the bond they had forged. The Varanite elite began their advance, their weapons raised, their movements precise and calculated. They were closing in fast, their dark forms a stark contrast to the golden light that surrounded Caden and Alara. With a deep breath, Alara raised her hand, and Caden felt the energy surge. The air around them crackled with power as the bond between them deepened, their thoughts merging, their emotions blending into a single, focused purpose. Together, they directed the energy of the Synergy Stone outward, toward the advancing Varanite elite. The ground trembled as a wave of golden light shot forward, radiating from the plateau like a tidal wave. The Varanite soldiers raised their weapons in a futile attempt to defend themselves, but it was too late. The wave of energy hit them with the force of a hurricane, tearing through their ranks, shattering their armor, and sending them flying backward. The elite soldiers were thrown to the ground, their weapons clattering uselessly at their sides. The energy of the Synergy Stone enveloped them, wrapping around their dark forms like tendrils of light, immobilizing them. The power was overwhelming, unstoppable, a force of nature that none of them could withstand. Caden watched in awe as the Varanites were consumed by the light. It was beautiful, terrifying, and absolute. The bond between him and Alara pulsed with a life of its own, their connection stronger than ever. Together they had done it. They had harnessed the power of the Synergy Stone, defeated the Varanites, and protected the planet from destruction. But even as the last of the Varanite soldiers fell, Caden felt a strange, unsettling sensation at the back of his mind. The bond between him and Alara, once strong and steady, was shifting, unraveling. The energy of the Synergy Stone had been pushed to its limit, and now it was beginning to fracture. "Alara," he whispered, his voice tight with fear. "Something's wrong." She turned to him, her silver eyes wide with alarm. "The bond," she said, her voice trembling. "It's breaking." Caden's heart lurched in his chest as he felt the bond between them weaken, the once strong connection fraying at the edges. The energy of the Synergy Stone, so powerful and overwhelming, had pushed them beyond their limits. And now it was tearing them apart. "We need to stop it," Caden said urgently, his mind racing as he tried to think of a solution. "We need to sever the connection before it destroys us." Alara nodded, her face pale with fear. "But how?" "The Synergy Stone. It's too strong." The ground beneath them trembled again, the air crackling with energy as the bond continued to unravel. Caden could feel the strain on his body, the exhaustion weighing him down as the energy of the Synergy Stone threatened to consume them both. And then in that moment of desperation, Caden made a decision. "I'll do it," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped him. "I'll sever the bond." Alara's eyes widened in shock. "No, you can't. If you—" "I have to," Caden interrupted, his voice firm. "It's the only way. The bond is tied to both of us, but I can take the brunt of it. If I sever my connection, you'll survive." Alara's face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes. "But you won't." Caden smiled, a sad, resigned smile. "It's okay. This is my choice." Before she could protest, before the bond could tear them apart completely, Caden focused all his strength, all his willpower, on the connection between them. He could feel the energy of the Synergy Stone pulsing through him, the bond that had been forged between him and Alara burning bright in his mind. And then, with a final, agonizing push, he severed the bond. The world went silent. The energy of the Synergy Stone dissipated in an instant, the golden light fading into nothingness. The bond between Caden and Alara, once so strong, was gone, cut off, severed completely. Caden collapsed to the ground, his body trembling with exhaustion. The pain was overwhelming, his mind reeling from the loss of the connection that had tied him to Alara. But even through the pain, he felt a sense of peace, a sense of finality. He had done it. He had saved her. Alara knelt beside him, tears streaming down her face as she cradled his head in her lap. Her voice was soft, broken, as she whispered his name. Caden, don't go. Please. He smiled weakly, his vision fading as the darkness closed in around him. It's okay, he whispered. You're safe now. And with that, Caden closed his eyes, the world fading into darkness. Epilogue. Alara stood at the edge of the plateau, her silver hair blowing in the wind as she looked out over the forest. The Varanite fleet was gone, their ships destroyed, their soldiers defeated. The planet was safe, for now. But the cost had been high. She glanced down at the Synergy Stone, now dull and lifeless in her hands. Its power had been spent, its light extinguished. The bond that had once tied her to Caden was gone, severed in the final moments of the battle. Her heart ached with the loss, the emptiness where the bond had once been. Caden was gone, sacrificed to save her, to save the planet. And though she knew it had been his choice, it didn't make the pain any easier to bear. But even in her grief, she knew that his sacrifice had not been in vain. The Varanites had been stopped, their plans foiled, and the Synergy Stone had been protected. The bond they had shared, however brief, had changed her, had changed everything. With a deep breath, Alara turned away from the plateau and began the long journey back to the forest. The Synergy Stone was quiet in her hands, its power dormant, but she knew that its legacy in Caden's would live on. As she walked, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faintest echo of a voice. I'm with you. And she knew, deep in her heart, that he always would be.